Welcome to another episode of the South by East podcast, where we discuss the scriptures, culture, and everything in between. Brail, this week, man, we're discussing, there was an article that came out recently about just the shrinking amount of African-American males on not only of primarily white institutions of higher learning, but also on HBCU campuses.
Yes.
And so, man, as we dig into this topic, you know, this one that should hit home because both you and I have master's degrees.
Yeah.
We spent quite a bit of time of our lives in school.
Yep, definitely.
So, man, tell me, like, where does this hit you as you started to hear about just...
So for me, my question is, where are they going? That's more important to me than the fact that they're not necessarily here. There is a cool podcast, Lecrae has a podcast called The Deep End. He had two brothers sit down on there. They're different leaders. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican. Great video. But in there, and he clipped this, there was one part of the video where I was like, you lost me. And the guy was like, hey, African Americans are graduating at the same rate as our white counterparts all across the United States. And African Americans, 82% of African Americans in the United States are wealthy. And I was like, that's an interesting stat. But the rest of the interview was good, so I skipped it. But then they had to clip that part. And I was like, of course you clip this part. So now I got to engage. And so I was like, I haven't seen any studies that show that 82% of African Americans are wealthy. What I did find out is, as I started looking at the wealth gap, that African Americans have come a long way when it comes to having wealth, being in the middle class here in America. And we've talked about on this podcast how not only the need for, not only people getting degrees is shrinking, but also the need for college degrees as we walk into certain fields is shrinking. And so my question is, all right, if African American males aren't showing up on campus, where are they going? Right? Are they going into the workforce? Are they going into trades? Where are they going? Before I hit the alarm bells, I'm like, what does this actually mean?
And I was at the same place because the article never really tells us where they're going. And how many years have we been saying, man, we got to get more people in tech school and in the trades and all that kind of stuff. And then so even there's been more articles about just the enrollment of colleges shrinking and different things of that nature overall.
Which is understandable.
And so, but I'm like, okay, you said that more people need to go to tech schools or need to go into the job force, and there's other careers, there's other ways because of student loan debt and different things of that nature. And so when your college classes start shrinking, before we raise the alarm, we need to know kind of like, well, are they going into more trades? What's happening?
Right.
And so we really don't get that. We kind of get this panic situation of, and I understand, like, here's the deal. This is why I always caution, man. So I lived down in Texas in a town where a lot of transplants moved there. They moved there because all the chemical plants. You go get a degree, no, not just engineering, but it could be process technology, it could be chemist, it could be all these different things. And so when you have a chemical plant that spans 10 miles, bro, that's a lot of people working in one area. So you can be in all kind of different careers and move there. Well, they move from one place, and so they're not really from there. So a lot of them are educated, they grow families, and they make good money or whatever, so they want their kids to be successful. They say, hey, you can go to college, you can be all this stuff, go do that, go off. Don't worry about staying here. Why? Because they're not from there. They're not really worried about that.
Right.
And a lot of them have minds of, man, one day when I retire, I'm gonna just move back to where I'm from.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what started to happen is, especially within the church, well, when they would be young and stuff, they would start there, they would move there, they would start churches, be a part of that. All their kids would be growing up there, and they would have all these kids busting out the nursery, children's ministry, everything else, and then they would get to a certain point when they get close to retirement age, they're like, well, I really have no roots back to where I was originally from. This is really where I built my life. But then you start seeing gaps. They had, over the years, they kind of started combining children's ministry classes and stuff like that. You had gaps, and you didn't have as many kids, and nobody noticed it because the adults kept going towards their earning potentials as they went further in their careers. And it's not until they retired and then their earning was kind of set that they start noticing that, we're missing a lot of people.
Right.
And part of the problem is that the majority of them, all of them, was saying like, tell their kids, go, go, go. And here's the deal, like, there's nothing wrong with telling your kids go out and do great things, but you also have to put into the heart of some of the people that, hey, some of you need to have a heart to come back here to this place and do for the next generation what was done for you. And I feel like what's happening is, yes, we do need more people in the trades. We do need more of that. And we need some people to still go and be college educated for the careers that do require college educations. And because we don't know how to practice as people, not going to the extreme the other way, we often find ourselves in these things and then we panic.
Yeah, and something that I've learned in these 6 years that we've been a church and the 5 that I've been on staff, and one of the big things that you do through different equipping and leadership training and development is teaching us how to think. And one of the things that I have learned here is that just because something isn't going the way you planned, it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a problem, but just that something has probably changed. And if I'm an HBCU and I start seeing that, okay, enrollment of a certain demographic is going down, my first question would be, okay, what has changed? And then how do we shift in light of that? So they're also seeing more women enroll. Okay, does this mean that we're not offering the things that young African American men are looking for? And do we need to shift and adjust? Or does it mean, all right, we need to mobilize and empower the group of women that are coming in? Like, is looking at things and not always looking at something to be like, oh, this is a red flag, something's different, this is a problem. It's like, okay, well then maybe the market has changed. And all right, so asking the question, what's changed? If we see that more African American males are going into trade schools, how do we partner with these trade schools to now be able to equip them to prepare our African American males to be effective in the job force and in the workforce?
Yeah.
Looking for the opportunities that come about because of the change.
Yeah, and my deal about it, I agree with that. And if we do research to find that, man, they're not in trade schools, they're not going directly. Now we need to.
Right.
We also need to.
Right. And why? What's the pivot?
What's the
Is
pivot?
the pivot? What do we need to do?
What's happening there, and where are these males going? And also, kind of, there is a population gap between the number of men and women in our society. So my deal is that is the drop proportional to that?
Right.
And so it's just like
Too.
for a part of it, it's getting more it's asking more questions and saying like, okay, where are things at around this? We've had previous episodes of, do we really need a degree for that?
Right.
Do we need that? And you see more companies changing around what they require degrees for even. And so
we had a presidential candidate running with that as one of their platforms, requiring less,
Yeah. And so my deal is I need to hear more before I start ringing a lot of alarm bells. I do know that, man, but I understand from the institution side where it's when you lose a part of the diversity, whether it's gender diversity or whatever in the group, you lose some as a part of the experience.
Yep, that's 100%.
You lose a part of the experience.
100% true.
And so, like for instance, I don't like you're a music person, so I don't know if you knew this. Man, growing up, I loved HBCU bands. I still do, right? Southern is one of the most kind of celebrated. Southern University, one of the most celebrated HBCU bands.
Okay.
But for the longest, if you looked at their band, they never had any woodwinds. The reason is, what gender mostly plays woodwinds?
Women.
Women. like clarinet and stuff like that. The reason they normally didn't have that is because their boot camp was so hard that for years no
Wow.
women ever made it through
Wow,
the
that's
band
crazy.
boot camp. And so when they played
Wow.
deals, I remember there was this big thing
That's wild.
after I graduated from college when like the first female made it through the boot camp
That's crazy.
to be, and they finally got like, oh, we starting to get some, and so they're being like certain songs they didn't play or whatever else, and it sounded different because they didn't have that.
Right. That's wild. But yeah, that's true, man. Like that experience is changed, right? That experience is changed without that. And so you got to be asking the right questions. And I think there's a matter of localization, right? Like when I read those stats, I spoke at first, before I went and did research, I responded. I was like, somebody else was like, I don't think this is right. I was like, yeah, I agree. I don't think this is right either. And I was like, and this is what it looks like in my community. Someone else was like, well, just because it's that way in your community doesn't mean that's what it is nationwide. And I said, no, you're right. And I was like, for one, I did the research, and yeah, nationwide, that's just
Yeah,
not true.
the wealth gap is still there
It's
for
just
African
still
Americans.
there.
Yeah,
But I
so-
was like, but on top of that, I was like, the reason I use my community as a reference point is because I noticed stats from my community, and I'm already making the pivots to affect change within my community. And so it's like when you see issues like this, you start as local as possible and go, all right, how do I
Yes.
affect? How do I
Yes.
recruit from around? How do I, if I want to affect this problem, I can start right here at home, right here in my community, and work towards that. And then from there, then we start looking at the larger problem.
Yeah. So what do you say? Is this a reason to ring the alarm? Is this a reason to cause for panic? Or should we be asking some more questions as we look at the shrinking number of African American male students on our college campuses? We'd like to hear from you in the comment section.